I believe we're live. We're hoping we're live. I tweeted it, so this is all true now. All right. As always, while we're getting settled and while people are joining us, we'll do a few housekeeping things. First, it's still, in fact, it's all about parasites this week. We're going to try to do almost all the questions about parasites. We got lots of good ones from you. Most of the questions were submitted before, but we will be monitoring the comments of this video right now. So feel free to chat in there and ask other questions. I will freely admit if I don't know the answer. But if we do know the answer, we'll give it to you right away. 2, check out the podcast of this show, available in the links below. You can also just search Healthcare Triage in iTunes and find it. I believe it's also on SoundCloud. We've also got an RSS feed if you use something else other than SoundCloud or iTunes. 3, you can check out the questions that have been asked in the document we update every week, link in the description. So all the questions that we do in that episode will be updated in the document, so you could just zip ahead, I suppose, to watch or hear just that answer to that question. Of course, I encourage you to watch and listen to the whole thing because it's always awesome. Check out the many different places where we are. Facebook.com/healthcaretriage. Great community being built there. You should go check it out. Reddit.com/healthcaretriage. Is that correct? There's something in there. It's the healthcare triage thing at Reddit. Links down below. You should go check it out. And of course, patreon.com/healthcare triage. We really do appreciate your support. Get ready for this episode. It's going to be awesome. And nothing of what I say will constitute medical advice. You should go see a doctor or nurse practitioner or some other advanced medical practitioner to get actual medical advice. Okay, let's begin. First question. In your Mental Floss episode on parasites, you said that the guinea worm has almost been eliminated. Are there any other parasites that are also close to being eliminated? There have been very, very few diseases, period, that have been eliminated from the face of the earth. So I think smallpox was officially eradicated in 1980, and at this point exists only in labs and not that many places. Rinderpest, if I remember correctly, was eradicated in, I want to say, 2011, and that might have been in dogs. I'm not even sure that was a human one, but I remember people yelling at me in the comments that when I talked in the guinea worm episode that I didn't mention rinderpest. So that's why it stuck with me. Guinea worm, if it goes, would be only the third disease to be eliminated completely, and it's in the second in humans. So that's a huge deal. Are there any others which are close? We get closer and closer with polio all the time. And there are countries in which it's really been eradicated thanks to vaccination. But other than that, the answer really in short is no. There are not many other diseases we've eradicated entirely, which is one of the reasons why it gets frustrating every time somebody attacks vaccines, because smallpox vaccine, polio vaccine, this is how we do it. If we make enough people immune, they can't have the reservoir, the disease dies out. Guinea worm is different, because guinea worm we did not get rid of by any kind of disease. We got rid of it by old-fashioned behavioral change, boots on the ground, trying just to change people what they do, not put their infected sores in water, to clean their water before they use it. And just doing that alone has got it to where I think there's been I think when I checked just a couple weeks ago to make the script for that Mental Floss video, which you should go watch, by the way, there were only 4 recorded cases through April of this year. I mean, 4. It's insane. There were a couple million just years ago. So that is about as close as we're getting, and I don't think there are any others that are really in the pipeline for the moment. Question 2 from Evil King Gumby. Since we get a lot of produce shipped in from overseas, what kind of parasites could we find buying fruits and vegetables at the market? Tips to avoid them aside from washing or rinsing stuff. Well, it's probably a little bit skewed to think that we need to worry about the stuff coming in from overseas. First of all, because of produce or for fruits and vegetables, because most of the parasites that I think I covered, especially in some of the other, are getting to us through meat of some kind. Your tapeworms come through meat. A lot of the other things that affect humans will come through meat as well. Plus, with produce coming in from overseas, I'm going to guess for the most part, it's been washed pretty thoroughly. Those things don't normally have the parasites. You have to remember the parasites have to get inside somehow. So with animals, it's easy for them to get inside because we're constantly putting stuff into us. Fruits and vegetables don't eat. So they don't constantly absorb stuff. There could be theoretically some parasites on them, but those get washed off, and they probably get washed off at many time points along the way between when they get shipped from overseas till they get to your table. So tips for everything is wash and prepare your food appropriately. Wash your fruits and vegetables. Cook your meats thoroughly. that alone is probably going to avoid the vast majority of stuff. There's really nothing else to do or that you can do, at least that I know of. So that's probably where I would go. Next, Eric Lynn, Toxoplasmosis goni, parasite found in cats, said to increase chance of schizophrenia later. Also found in raw meats. Thoughts? Well, you pretty much said it all. Toxoplasmosis is like, it is found in cats. It's like where they get cat scratch disease. It's also, I think, where that song Cat Scratch Fever comes from, amazingly enough, unless that's a myth. So it's a concern of some people will get infected. It's especially concerning for women who are pregnant because it does have some issues with birth defects. Or birth issue or issues while you were pregnant. You can get it other ways. It's why, you should be careful cleaning out litter boxes, especially when you're pregnant. It's why that there are some recommendations. However, the overall risk of this is still, I think, pretty low. And so it's something everybody worries about, but not necessarily something that happens all the time. But, as always, again, be careful. And if it's found in meats, you got to prepare your meat and do it right, so you don't have to worry about that. Or you do have to worry about that. Anime Lily asks, how bad is athlete's foot ringworm? Are there any long-term effects for not treating it aggressively other than occasional itchiness? And then she added, I should probably mention I'm breastfeeding and her, not me. She's breastfeeding and most antifungal medications appear to cause birth defects, and so she's just been more meticulous with soap and water. Okay, how bad is athlete's foot? Well, you tell me. It's not going to threaten your life, but some people do find that it's very painful. And some people find that it is very annoying. And so that's more of a subjective, how much is it bothering you kind of thing. Having said that, it is a fungal disease. Now, you mentioned that the antifungal medications appear to cause birth defects. I'd encourage you to make sure that you're talking about, the oral antifungals versus, the topical antifungals, because I'm not sure that there's as much of a warning for the topical ones as there is for the oral ones. Now, that's not medical advice, and you should go check. But, the topical antifungals, the sprays, the creams, those are pretty ubiquitous. People are using those all the time, and they're in pretty low concentrations. And that's the usual treatment for athlete's foot. So certainly talk to your doctor before you use any therapy, especially if you're pregnant. But most athlete's foot is treated with topical antifungals. Rarely. I've never actually even heard of anyone prescribing or needing to prescribe oral antibiotics for athlete's foot, although I suppose it could occur. I think the vast majority of it is treated topically, locally, and that's not as big a deal. And so, if it's not a problem for you, if you don't have a reason not to take it, I certainly would. It's going to clear it up much better. Fungal infections are not going to get treated so much by soap and water. They will likely get treated at some point, perhaps by your own immune system fighting it off, but that can take a while. Topical antifungals are usually the therapy of choice. Just me, that's fine, asks, in central Missouri, it's Mississippi, look at that. See, Sheridan could have allowed me to pretend that I got the abbreviation correct, but she's such a stickler to the truth that she made sure all of you know that I saw MS and thought it was Missouri and not Mississippi, and it is Mississippi. With dogs, cats, equines, goats, and spring-fed pond, she or he is worried about his boys or her boys, 4 and 12, and what parasites they might acquire other than ringworms. There's lots of stuff that would live in Mississippi. This coming up episode on Monday is ticks. There's ticks everywhere. Different kinds of ticks live in different parts of the country, but certainly you could always get ticks, and it sounds like you live in an area that might have trees and brush and everything, and ticks could be there. There are certainly other parasites you can get through meat. Just because you live in Mississippi doesn't mean that the meat brought to you is cleaner than the meat anywhere else. A number of people every year get tapeworms, and that's from not cooking their meat appropriately. You can get other diseases through pork, or things like that. And so there are other parasites that everyone can get. But as always, the rules are the same. Watch yourself for parasites that you don't get bit while you're outside. You should watch the ticks episode. Clean your food appropriately. Cook it appropriately. You will avoid the vast majority of parasites. Ashnug1 asks, in July, I start Peace Corps service in Ethiopia. They have a host of parasitic diseaes. Besides precautions like cook food thoroughly and boil water, are there any other steps to help prevent them? Well, I want to, sort of yes and no. So certainly that's the best thing you could do, is to wash your food thoroughly. Wash it, cook it, do everything appropriately. Having said that, it's important to remember that, there's no judgment here. The parasites keep surviving because they're wily and they get through your defenses. And a lot of people who live in other countries, other than the United States and other countries as well, have higher levels of parasites, not because they're lazy, but because it is just hard to avoid them all. The good news is that the vast majority of parasites don't harm their hosts, because otherwise they couldn't survive. If they killed off everybody, that would be a disease, and then they would not be able to pass on to the next level. They survive by not long-term damaging most hosts. So if you do get infected, you will take the medication and you will kill the parasite, and it is very, very likely the life would go on. So I would say be careful, but I wouldn't be obsessive or overly panicked about it. You meet people from other countries all the time who parasites are just a way of life, and they're not nearly as concerned about it as many of us are who don't see them quite as often. Next question. N. Kicker. Do people have to worry at all about the fungal parasite of Ophiocordyceps? So that's the one, if I remember correctly, and if you watch the Mental Floss episode, the one that controls the ants and makes them into takes over their brains and zombifies them and controls them and makes them march up the grass and like grab onto it so they can be eaten by a cow. It's amazing. I mean, they manipulate the nervous system and make them walk around. In real life, no. In certain video games and books, yes, because that's how we get the zombie apocalypse. I'm not going to mention the book or the video game because that would spoil both of them perhaps. But in both, I can think of one of each of those, both of which are phenomenal, by the way. And if I didn't care about spoiling it, I would recommend the book highly right now. The video game as well. But in both of those, when you finally figure out what the zombie apocalypse is going on, it turns out that this is the fungus that's causing it. It's adapted to humans, taking over them, and that makes a lot of sense if you think about the zombie apocalypse, because the fungus takes over, and then what it does is control the host to bite other people so that it can transfer the fungus and keep reproducing that way. It's brilliant. So it is sort of a rationally scientific way that people try to make the zombies work. But in this world, that doesn't happen yet. And Kicker also asks, what would be the best, easier option to eliminate malaria? Eliminate all mosquitoes or curing malaria? Isn't malaria now drug resistant? Well, drug resistant, but still treatable. But the best way to prevent malaria and everything else is avoiding it. And so mosquito nets are hugely useful, and sort of taking the medication ahead of time sometimes can help some bit. But certainly curing malaria would be a better fix. I just don't know that we're there, especially since you have to remember that it's a parasite. So it's not like we can cure malaria. People get malaria and we treat it and it goes away. That's curing it. The problem is that too many people can't get the therapy before they get truly sick, or the therapy is not working. We don't cure parasites, we eradicate parasites. That's why we eradicate the guinea worm. And so that is the end goal. Not because we can get guinea worms out of people eventually, and then they are cured. They do not have guinea worm anymore, but it's painful and horrific. So we want to eradicate it. And I don't know that we could eradicate the mosquitoes. I just don't know if that's even possible or if that's even wise. But curing malaria won't work. We do have a treatment. So the best thing we can do at this point is prevent people from getting malaria, since mosquitoes are going to continue to exist for the foreseeable future. Next question comes from Rachel Tan. Does the herbal parasite treatment work? For example, wormwood, neem, cloves, garlic, etc. The fact that you can just randomly list a number of things and then put an etc. after it would lead me to believe that these have not been widely tested or proven. And it's the fact that we're not even listing a parasite. So it's possible that there probably is some sort of homemade therapy that works to treat certain parasites. I would believe that. I'd like to see it rigorously studied. And if it was, then I would no longer call it herbal. I would call it treatment. Because again, the dividing line for me is not like Eastern or Western medicine or, corporate or natural medicine. It's scientifically proven and unscientifically proven. So if something is proven to me, that is treatment. I don't care where it comes from. So if there is some sort of herb that has been proven to treat parasites, by all means, that's awesome. Great, but I don't know of any. Next question, Mike Wilson. Are there any beneficial parasites? I know in the past people used things like leeches and maggot therapy as treatments. Did they work? Are they still used much today? I believe that they do work. I know I've read about leeches being used, and I've even read articles about a resurgence of them being used. The thing is, they don't work better than therapies. Leeches actually, I believe, can be used to thin blood or keep it from, clotting, because that's what leeches do. They want the blood flow continually coming out into them, so they keep you from clotting off locally at the end. So I think that they have been used to do that near wounds. But we also have medications that do that, and we have rigorously tested those medications, and we can fine-tune the doses and everything else. So you'd have to make an argument that you'd want the leeches as opposed to the drugs. And for the most part, the drugs work pretty well and are safe and easy to get and not nearly as sick or gross as a leech. So we use those more. Maggots were used because maggots will eat, I think, dead things, but not live things. They were used actually to debride wounds. And I remember that scene also in The Gladiator, the movie, you may remember, where Russell Crowe's friend puts the maggots in the wound while he's asleep to eat up all the bad stuff. We don't do that as much anymore because it's gross, and because flies carry other diseases and everything else, and we have therapies to treat those same kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that they didn't work in the past or that they're not useful. And so certainly those things do work, and I think that they maybe are still used in places today, but not when other options, I would say, are likely available. N Kicker, have you encountered parasite cases as a pediatrician? That's a great question. Let me think. I've met lots of people who've had parasites, so there were actually lots of people in my medical school class who came from other countries that had been infected with parasites and would tell awesomely gross stories about when they were children, and pooping on the side of the road and all the worms would pour. It was awesome. It's really close to lunchtime. That was a mistake. But I don't know that I've ever treated. I mean, GI infections, some. Giardia, probably. Nothing cool that you would care about. No tapeworms or no hookworms or no filariasis or the worms in people's eyes. I've never seen any of those, thank goodness, because those would probably keep you up at night. But I'm sure they do exist. I know pediatricians who have treated people who have those infections. You got to remember, I do a very little amount of clinical time. After residency and fellowship, I do a half day of clinic every other week. So not that much clinically, so I probably have not seen a lot of the rare stuff as much as somebody who's actively a clinical pediatrician day in and day out. But these things do happen. Matthew Clay asks, is Giardia dangerous or does it cause discomfort? Giardia, see, there you go. Answer from Mayo Clinic, lactose intolerance. Many people with Giardia infection develop lactose intolerance. Oh, you're helping me. Woo! I am just screwing it up left and right today. I thought Matthew Clay was trying to pre-prep me with some information that he'd been found. So I would actually say, so is Giardia dangerous? This is actually ironically the one that I might have known the answer to already, having just mentioned that I've treated Giardias in the past. But, most people get Giardia get treated and then it goes away. Some people develop lactose intolerance, and then lactose intolerance is they just can't digest milk sugars appropriately. So milk and dairy often become a problem, and not a problem like it's going to kill you, but a problem with gastric discomfort, bloating, gas, diarrhea, not feeling so good, and they can persist after the infection has been cleared for a variable amount of time. Some people short term, some people long term, But that is also one of those where we don't know if it's that people just get nervous and notice it or don't. It's not like we're, so I think a lot of people are fine after their Giardia infection, but some people do get this long-term lactose intolerance. And so, yeah, you want to avoid Giardia if you can. But, most people, it's going to be fine. But it is bad diarrhea, bad. And in children, especially small children or the elderly or people who live in under-resourced settings, that diarrhea can get so bad that they can become very dehydrated, which can be a real problem. And so I'm not trying to minimize how bad a Giardia infection is, but for the most part, it's a diarrheal illness which we can test for and treat in developed countries and in areas where we know how to treat for that stuff. Sarah Gao asks, are different people more prone to get certain parasitic diseases, or are we all at the same risk? I don't know. And I don't know because I'm not even sure that's been studied. Because to truly study that in like an RCT-like fashion, you'd have to see if people who get infected once are likely to get reinfected again. You'd have to actually try and not to try to infect people. And I don't know that we do that or that actually, that's been done. There might be some cohort studies that have checked that out, but probably what the thing is, they probably haven't looked enough at the individual level to see what are the differences. And even then, are they differences in things we can see, like are certain races more likely to get them or a certain sex is more likely to get them? Or is it genetic, that there's some like gene that you can measure that could make someone more or less susceptible? And the answer is, I don't know. And I don't know if anybody's even looked at that. But you've piqued my interest. Maybe I'll go look it up after the show. Next question comes from James. We just moved to Upper Michigan from Oklahoma, and the mosquitoes here are huge. For everyday use, is the standard repellent spray sold in stores safe, or should we be looking elsewhere? Of course, the stuff sold in stores is safe. That's why it's sold in stores. People do freak out about this stuff and get very concerned about DEET and whatnot, but even DEET is, if used properly, is safe. I went on an Alaska fishing trip a couple years ago, and the mosquitoes there can be horrific. But we used DEET appropriately, and we used is it permethrin? I think it's permethrin. It's something you put on clothes, and that stuff works. DEET that stuff is amazing. It keeps the mosquitoes away hugely, and it's unfortunate because the backlash against DEET and other anti-mosquito medications makes it more likely that people are going to get malaria because we can do something about this. So the stuff you can buy in stores, follow the instructions on the side of the label. It is safe if used properly. It is. It's been studied extensively. This was actually even one of the myths in our book because everybody's always into those citronella candles. Those citronella candles do not work. And when I mean by do not work, I mean unless you're like this close to it, it does not work. So yeah, if you hover next to a flame, like super close, like it's going to burn you, the mosquito ain't coming into that area. But if you put the citronella candle over here and you sit over here, it doesn't. It's like the thing is, like in those studies, is like it reduces your chance a tiny amount of getting stung, but the vast majority of people still get stung. And of course, what you want is not, instead of 4 stings, I get 3. You want none, and to get none, DEET. And so buy the stuff in the stores if you want to use it appropriately. That stuff works, especially if the mosquitoes are huge and they're really bothering you. Valerie Jones asked, what happens if a pinworm infestation is left untreated? Will the immune system resolve the parasites on its own? I don't know. I'm going to guess. I don't, it's like, that's one of those where it's like, I don't know if we've studied that to look at it. The immune system is pretty good and eventually might. On the other hand, a lot of these parasites have evolved incredibly well to avoid the immune system as much as possible. In fact, there was a study a couple years ago that another person I think asked about. I just haven't seen the question. Maybe it's coming. About it, trying to use pinworms in the treatment of Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is an inflammatory bowel disorder, much like ulcerative colitis, which I have. Crohn's disease, my brother has Crohn's too. So we're just the GI family. So what happens is they've given people pinworm, pig pinworm. They give it to them in a slurry because the human body is much better at fighting off pig pinworms than human pinworms, and so the infection is more short-limited. But the reason they think it might help, and in some small trials I believe it has helped, is because the pinworms go in there and they sort of help to shut down the immune system, which is sort of what you want. So the drug I take for ulcerative colitis is an immunosuppressive. My problem with my GI disease, like with Crohn's, is that the immune system keeps attacking itself. So my gut is attacking me or attacking itself. So you can get inflammation of the gut, which can cause bleeding and malnutrition and all other kinds of stuff. And that constant attacking of the gut long term can lead to some bad things theoretically, like cancer or whatnot. And so, what you want to do, and what happens with my drug, is it shuts down the immune system a little bit so it doesn't attack me and myself as much, and that helps to control it. So those pinworms, when they give them to people with Crohn's, they are thought to perhaps help also shut down the immune system, because that's how the pinworms stay alive, by shutting down the immune system and keeping from being eradicated. That also is a side benefit, may help people with Crohn's. This sounds gross, but they did a clinical trial for like 250 people. Some of the results were positive. They're doing further studies, I think. They're talking to the FDA about how this might turn into a therapy. It sounds crazy, but that's, we're trying to use the pinworm, what they do to stay alive, to help people with disease. So it does appear that that the pinworms might be able to stick around for a long time because they stop the human body from fighting it off. So there you go. The 3 Mavi asks, are there any good or helpful parasites? Well, okay, there's one I just mentioned. I know like you can find stories of parasites or like things that work together, but usually when something is helpful, we call it a symbiote, because then it has a symbiotic relationship. So the difference between a parasite and a symbiote is that the parasite is getting all the benefit and the host is sort of getting screwed. If the parasite's also providing a benefit, then we just call it a symbiote. So I guess even there's an easy answer. The answer is no, because if any parasite was helpful, it would be a symbiote by definition. So there are no helpful parasites. That's just a semantic thing, though. Fox Fact 1. I live in the South and am afraid to swim in the summer after hearing stories about Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba. Should I continue to exercise caution when swimming in lakes and rivers, or are my fears a bit too irrational? So you should watch the Mounts of Flots episode, because I specifically talk about Naegleria fowleri and how it actually killed 2 people a number of years ago. I think it was in Louisiana, but it was the South, because they used neti pots with tap water, which had Naegleria fowleri in them, and the fowleri were like, ooh, we already got into the sinus, let's get to the brain, and it killed 2 people. But my take-home fact was that is like, I don't want to use a neti pot, because that's how the stuff gets to your brain. Avoiding swimming seems a bit excessive, because it's like, nobody got Naegleria fowleri from drinking the water. 2 people got it from putting the water into their sinuses where it shouldn't be by pouring it in there with neti pots. So no one died from swimming. No one died from drinking it. 2 people died from neti pots. My take-home message was don't use the neti pots, not don't ever touch the water or swim in it. So you probably are going to be fine. It's if you just go with statistics too, the CDC is obviously seeing that millions of people go to swimming venues, and very, 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 very few people become infected each year. Why those people become infected is unknown, but some do. But you cannot get it from drinking water contaminated with it. You can only be infected when the contaminated water goes up your nose, which is the neti pots, and that's what it is. And I just saw a statistic here. There have been 35 reported infections in the United States in the 10 years from 2005 to 2014, despite hundreds of millions of recreational water exposures each year. Those risks are low. Low. You are so much more likely to die in a car or by getting shot. Anyway, Nat, look at that. It's noon. We're out. We've done it. Let's just recap all the other places you can tide yourself over till we come back. Go to Twitter, where we are all over Twitter. HC Triage on Twitter. Go to Facebook, facebook.com/healthcaretriage. Reddit, link down below because I can't remember what it is. The podcast, go to iTunes, search Healthcare Triage. Patreon.com/Healthcare Triage. Help support the show. Tons of neat rewards. You'll be doing good. You'll help us make the show bigger and better, and that would be awesome. We will be back live next Wednesday at 11:30. Links will be in the description shortly. Put all your questions for next week in the link for next week's video, not this week's video, because we will not look anymore at any of the questions you put in this week's video. Next week's video, links will be live soon. Catch Healthcare Triage News on Friday. Catch Healthcare Triage on Monday. It's ticks. We're closing out Parasite Month, and I'll be glad to get back to regular old other stuff. Thank you all for watching. We love you so much. See you next week.